Imagine, if you will, falling asleep when you are just 8 years old. You drift off the exact same way you always do.
Right, get a totally normal night.
Exactly. You're staring up at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, and you're wishing with every fiber of your being for something, something extraordinary to happen.
Like every kid does.
Yeah, exactly like every kid. And then you wake up. But it is not to the extraordinary adventure you were picturing at all. You wake up to a heavy, just relentless spring rain violently washing away the last of the winter's snow.
Ugh, that cold, gray morning feeling.
You know it, and you look at the front window, and your mother's station wagon is missing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It is this terrifying, sudden void right in the center of your home. So, searching for some kind of distraction from this immediate collapse of your reality, you wander outside into the drizzle. You slip through a hidden gap in the dense cedar hedge next door, and, well, you find a strange boy hiding there.
Just hiding in the bushes.
Right. He is pale, he has a buzzed haircut, and there is a hole in the knee of his pants.
Thus begins a 22-year saga of friendship, of profound loss, and ultimately the terrifying prospect of risking absolutely everything you hold dear for love.
It is, honestly, it's a profoundly vivid, almost cinematic opening to a relationship that will totally alter the course of two lives.
It really is.
Because you are stepping right into the raw, immediate aftermath of a fractured childhood. I mean, that initial image, the freezing rain, the missing car, the strange boy hiding in the hedge.
Right.
It does way more than just set the scene. It establishes the emotional baseline for every single decision these characters will make over the next 2 decades.
Oh, absolutely. And welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today you are exploring the incredibly sweeping, just emotionally turbulent narrative of Carley Fortune's novel, Our Perfect Storm.
Such a fantastic book.
It really is. And to truly honor the focus of today's deep dive, we are going to dive straight into a highly detailed, strictly chronological summary of this story.
I love that approach for this one. Yeah, we are refusing to get diverted.
Yeah.
We are locking in on the gripping, decades-long narrative of Francesca Gardner, who goes by Frankie, and George St. James, and we are not letting go until we reach the final page.
And, the chronological approach is essential here, because this isn't just a romance, and it's really not just your standard coming-of-age story either.
No, not at all.
It is a meticulous psychological examination of the messy reality of growing up. It looks at the deep, just lingering sting of parental abandonment, and it dissects how a childhood bond can become so foundational.
Yeah, so deeply ingrained.
Right, so ingrained in your survival mechanisms that it literally becomes tattooed on your very ribcage.
Which we will definitely get to.
Oh, for sure.
But let's start right where that foundation is poured. We are looking at Frankie and George between the ages of 8 and 10. The prologue of the book sets this up with just remarkable, agonizing precision. Frankie is 8 years old, and her mother has suddenly vanished.
Just gone.
Gone. We learn her mother was a former marine biology student with this intense, long-standing obsession with whales. She hasn't just, gone to the grocery store. She has packed her bags and moved to the east coast of New Brunswick.
Wow.
Yeah, specifically to document North Atlantic right whales.
I mean, put yourself in the mind of an 8-year-old trying to process that. You just can't. And the sensory details the author uses to describe that specific morning, they reflect the psychological shock perfectly.
They really do.
Like Frankie wakes up and there's this heavy rain attacking the snow. She notices purple and white crocus blossoms that have been violently liberated from the ice.
That phrasing is so good.
It's beautiful. And she and her older brothers, Darwin, who is 12, and Moby, who is 10.
Wait, Moby, like the whale?
Yes, exactly like the whale. The mom's obsession runs deep. So they are kneeling by the window. They are watching the tire grooves in the driveway filling with rain, which the narrative describes as heaven-sent tears.
Oh, that's heavy. And their dad is just standing there, sipping his coffee, barely speaking at all. He is a barrel-chested cabinet maker. I mean, he's a man whose entire profession is built on creating solid, stable things.
Right, things you can rely on.
Exactly. And he is completely unequipped to fix his own family. He just tells the kids that their mother has gone home.
Which is such a devastating phrase to use with children, because Frankie's immediate internal reaction is, wait, this was our house? Wasn't this home?
It just shatters her entire paradigm of safety.
Totally shatters it. Her 12-year-old brother, Darwin, seems to grasp the finality of it, so he retreats into silence. But Frankie and Moby are just lost in this sudden vacuum of maternal care. I mean, Frankie's hair is this ratty, tangled mass because her mom isn't there to comb it out.
Yeah, the dad just basically kicks them outside into the drizzle to play because he simply cannot handle the emotional fallout of his wife walking out.
He's checking out.
He really is. And this is where we see Frankie employ a very common, yet really telling childhood coping mechanism.
Hyperfixate.
Yes, hyperfixation as a distraction strategy. Her brothers won't pass her the basketball, so she grabs a green butterfly net.
Of course.
She's wandering the yard looking for a worm or a grasshopper to control, basically. But instead, she spots this pale brown rabbit in the grass. It has these long, velvety ears and a twitching pink nose. And she's out there wearing her yellow raincoat and rubber boots.
The classic kid armor.
Exactly. And she decides, with absolute conviction, that she is going to catch this rabbit to make her brothers jealous.
It's totally an attempt to regain agency in a world that just stripped her of it. Her mother is gone, her brothers are shutting her out, her father is emotionally absent. Catching the rabbit is a goal she can dictate.
It's something she can win.
Right. It's a small universe she can master while her actual universe is collapsing.
But of course, the rabbit runs. It bounds across the wet field, and Frankie chases it all the way to the dense cedar hedge that borders the neighboring property. And we need a little context here for you, the listener, to understand the stakes for an 8-year-old.
Oh, the neighborhood lore.
The lore is real. The kids in the neighborhood fully believe that the woman who lives in the imposing big house next door is a literal witch. Her name is Mimi. She's a former Montreal ballet dancer. She wears these flowing black caftans and she smokes skinny cigarettes.
She sounds fabulous to an adult, but terrifying to a kid.
Exactly. So in Frankie's mind, if the rabbit goes into the witch's yard, it's going to be used for potions. Frankie absolutely has to save it.
And notice how that impulse to save, to rescue a vulnerable creature, it completely overrides her fear of the witch.
It really does.
She slips through a gap in the wet cedar branches, and instead of a rabbit, she gasps, because she sees a pair of dark blue eyes squinting back at her from the shadows.
Enter George St. James. And the description of him in this moment, it strips away any pretense of boyhood toughness. He is winter pale, he has round rosy cheeks, dark eyelashes, and his hair is buzzed incredibly short.
He's just so small in that moment.
It's so small. And more importantly, he is completely unprepared for the harsh elements. Frankie is armored in her rubber boots and her yellow raincoat, but George just has a hooded sweatshirt with a stain on the sleeve and pants with a hole in the knee. He's standing in the wet grass, violently shivering.
The immediate psychological dynamic that forms between them right there in that hedge is fascinating. Frankie introduces herself, she sticks out her palm, and George takes it. She asks if he was watching her, and he blushes, admitting, well, not for long.
Such a sweet interaction.
It is. He tells her he lives at the big house now. And Frankie's internal monologue here is the absolute key to their entire future. She looks at this soft, unprotected boy living in a house she associates with danger, and she decides he needs defending, he needs rescuing. And she explicitly notes that her toes curl at the thrill of it.
I mean, think about the power dynamic there. Her mother just abandoned her, leaving her feeling utterly powerless. But suddenly, right here, is a boy who appears even more fragile and vulnerable than she is. She can control this narrative.
She can be the protector.
Right. She can be the protector she wishes her mother had been.
Because we learn very quickly the horrifying extent of George's backstory. He hasn't just moved to a new house, he has just lost his mother. She died.
It's so tragic.
It's awful. And in the immediate aftermath of that profound, life-shattering tragedy, his father brings him to this imposing stone manor, drops him off with an eccentric grandmother he barely knows, and just drives away.
His father just abandons him.
Yes. So you have two 8-year-olds staring at each other through the rain, both drowning in the exact same flavor of trauma. Sudden, inexplicable parental abandonment.
I kept thinking about an analogy for this kind of childhood bond while I was reading. Think about a young sapling, right? A tiny tree growing right next to a chain link fence or a metal post.
Okay, I can picture that.
If the tree gets injured or restricted by that post early enough in its development, it doesn't just grow away from it. The bark grows around it. The metal post becomes entirely engulfed by the wood. Years later, you can't remove the post without destroying the tree. The obstacle has become a permanent part of its structural integrity.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize their psychology.
Yeah.
Their shared trauma is that metal fence post. They don't just become friends, they enmesh.
Enmesh is the perfect word.
Because George is grieving a dead mother and a ghost of a father. Frankie is grieving a mother who actively chose Wales over her own daughter. They become each other's entire support system. The adults in their lives are either absent emotionally catatonic or eccentric. They only have each other to rely on for any sense of consistency and safety.
The book actually makes this enmeshment incredibly literal as time goes on. Frankie's dad starts referring to George as Frankie's missing rib.
Oh, I love that detail.
It's so telling. He'll ask her, "Where's your rib?" Or he'll say, "Haven't seen your rib since this morning." It's this casual biblical joke on the surface. But it points to this much deeper idea that George is not just a neighbor. He is an essential structural component of Frankie's own body. He is of her, not separate from her.
A metaphor they eventually make permanent, by the way.
Yes. As adults, they literally get each other's names tattooed on their rib cages.
It is the ultimate physical manifestation of that childhood trauma bond. They are advertising to the world that they are structurally incomplete without one another.
So this foundational period culminates in an incredibly bittersweet, poignant scene when they turn 10 years old. Frankie's mother actually comes back.
She does.
After 18 months of chasing whales, she returns, crying and talking about how much she missed her family. Frankie's older brothers forgive the mom almost instantly, eager to have a mother again.
Which makes sense for them.
It does. But Frankie refuses. She stays fiercely mad. And in the midst of this emotional confusion, with the household dynamics shifting all over again, Frankie and George decide to get married.
It's a pretend wedding, obviously, but the emotional weight behind it for these two children is just staggering. They hold this ceremony on a crisp September afternoon under the apple tree in Frankie's backyard.
The setting is so vivid.
And the specific details highlight how they've basically scavenged a world of their own out of the scraps left by the adults. Frankie's dress is a flouncy sheer curtain that George found in his grandmother Mimi's dress-up trunk.
Huh?
George is wearing a woolly green sweater and a felt top hat that used to belong to his grandfather.
They pick dark autumn violets for a bouquet. And the vows are written on scraps of paper torn from George's ringed notebook.
That ringed notebook paper comes back later, too.
Oh, we will definitely get to that. But they read these solemn promises to each other, they formally shake hands, and they throw dried rice they stole from Mimi's pantry. It's play, but it's a deeply serious, almost desperate kind of play. They are forging a contract of permanence in a world where the adults have proven themselves entirely unreliable.
Right. And if we look at the child psychology at play here, play is the primary vehicle children use to process reality. By staging a wedding, they are taking the ultimate societal symbol of permanent, unshakable commitment and applying it to themselves.
They're locking it in.
Exactly. They're attempting to magically bind themselves together so that neither of them will ever be abandoned again. They're essentially saying, the adults left us, so we will be the adults for each other. We will be the ones who stay.
So we have this intense trauma bond forged in abandonment and solidified by a backyard wedding at age 10. The natural question for anyone observing this is, well, how does a bond built on the fear of abandonment survive when the children grow up, leave a nest, and face the real world?
It's the ultimate test.
It really is. And this brings us to their late 20s. The contrast between their 10-year-old selves and their 27-year-old selves is just stark. Their paths have completely diverged, both professionally and romantically. Yet, despite this massive external separation, that core bond, that fence post they grew around, remains the absolute anchor of their lives.
Let's examine how that trauma manifests in Frankie's adulthood first. At 27, she's dealing with a catastrophic case of career burnout. We learn that she originally went to culinary school, carrying a massive chip on her shoulder.
A huge chip.
Because her first boss in the industry made a dismissive comment that she was, quote, good for a female.
Ugh, the worst.
Right. Frankie took that as a declaration of total war. She decided she wasn't just going to be good for a female, she was going to be undeniably, plainly good. She also desperately wanted to prove her mother wrong because her mom had warned her about the intense, grueling, often toxic life of a chef.
But the psychology behind her career choice is even deeper than spite, isn't it? I mean, cooking is about control. You follow a recipe, you apply heat, you get a predictable result. For a girl whose mother unpredictably walked out the door one morning, mastering the culinary arts is a way to master her environment.
That's a great point.
But she dug in too deep. She literally burned herself in the kitchen. She spent 6 days a week in a high-pressure hellfire. And where'd she end up? Working for a boss named Bree, acting as a human content machine.
Which is so unfulfilling.
Completely. She's not creating art or nurturing people. She's churning out algorithm-driven TikTok food trends.
And that distinction between art and algorithm is crucial to her mental state. The narrative specifically mentions her inventing recipes like Marry Me Chicken or the stew purely to win the internet's attention.
Just feeding the beast.
Exactly. It is soulless, metric-driven work. She respects her boss's hustle, but Frankie feels completely hollered out. There's a voice in the back of her mind screaming, "This is not it." She wanted to feed people, to create a sense of home and connection she lost as a child. And instead, she's just feeding a digital algorithm that demands endless, perfectly curated content.
Now, contrast Frankie's highly structured, indoor, predictable digital life with George at 27. He has become a tenacious, highly successful freelance reporter. But he doesn't cover local politics or heartwarming human interest stories.
No, not George.
He chases dangerous, high-stakes assignments. He goes where the conflict is, where the physical danger is truly palpable.
And we really have to ask why. Why does George choose a life of constant peril? I mean, he's a hustler, he's succeeded in a dwindling print industry, but it keeps him constantly on the move. Frankie explicitly notes that being George's friend means accepting his absolute refusal to be attached to anyone or anywhere.
I see this as a textbook case of repetition compulsion, but inverted.
Expand on that.
Well, George was abandoned in a massive, cold stone house by his father. He was forced to be completely static while the world and his parents left him behind. As an adult, his career is a constant state of motion and risk. He refuses to put down roots because roots can be ripped out of the ground.
Wow, yeah.
If he is always the one packing a bag, always the one leaving for a dangerous assignment, he can never be the one left behind again. His dangerous reporting isn't just bravery, it's a profound psychological shield against vulnerability.
That is an incredibly astute reading of his character. He uses geographical distance and mortal peril to keep emotional intimacy at bay. Which brings us to the summer of 2023, the apocalyptic fires.
Oh, man.
The author describes this summer in horrifying, vivid detail. Massive wildfires are burning across Canada, from Alberta all the way to Nova Scotia. By June, there are 390,000 acres burning in Ontario and Quebec alone.
It's hard to even picture that scale.
It really is. Frankie is back in Toronto, and the smoke has blanketed the city, turning the sun this terrifying, apocalyptic red. Ash is blowing all the way to Manhattan in Europe. The entire world feels like it's ending.
And where's George? He is right in the belly of the beast. He is in the Northwest Territories near Yellowknife, covering a fire that has literally just incinerated the entire hamlet of Enterprise.
So dangerous.
The wind is howling, abandoned vehicles are melting in the ditches, the highway is bordered by towering walls of flame, and from this literal hellscape he calls Frankie.
This phone call is arguably the emotional fulcrum of their entire 20s. Frankie is terrified. She knows he's exhausted. She knows he smells of ash. He's dreaming of fire. And George's voice on the phone is panicked in a way she has never heard before. He starts saying things like, "If I don't make it."
And Frankie just completely shuts him down. She cannot handle it. She says, "Don't you dare say what you're going to say next. You are driving out of that fire and you are coming home to me. No ifs, George. This is not how our story ends. We are friends forever."
The denial is so strong.
It is. She throws up the friends barrier like a shield to protect her own sanity.
But George, pushed to the absolute edge by the proximity of death, he pushes right through her denial. He says, "Frankie, listen to me. I need you to really hear me, okay? I love you."
Boom.
Right there, the platonic illusion they've maintained for decades just shatters.
Huh.
For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the romantic subtext violently breaches the surface. It's a collision of the external and the internal. The external environmental crisis, the literal world burning down around him, strips away all of George's carefully constructed emotional armor. When you are faced with imminent mortality, you stop pretending. You state what is true.
He doesn't say, "I love you" like a sister. He doesn't say, "I love you" like a best friend. He says, "I love you." So what does Frankie do with that earth-shattering revelation once George survives the fires and comes back to civilization?
Oh, she runs.
She retreats. She runs in the exact opposite direction. She gets into a relationship with a guy named Nate.
Let's talk about Nate, because he represents a very specific psychological safety mechanism for Frankie. Nate is a tenured professor. He owns a home. He is established, predictable, and remarkably calm. Frankie actually describes him as having, quote, "park ranger energy."
Park ranger energy. I love that phrase, but we have to unpack Frankie's choices here because as a reader, it is immensely frustrating. But if you look at the psychology, it is incredibly human.
Totally.
If you've ever sought out a deeply boring partner after experiencing profound trauma or chaos, you will recognize exactly what Frankie is doing. Her engagement to this guy with park ranger energy is a direct reaction to the absolute terror she felt when she thought George was going to burn to death in a rental car in Yellowknife.
You are hitting on a crucial concept. Our nervous systems, when traumatized, often misinterpret safe and boring as healed. You have to combine that immediate, visceral terror of losing George in the fire with the unresolved, lingering trauma of her mother's unpredictable abandonment when she was 8. Her nervous system simply cannot handle the volatility of loving George romantically. Loving George means loving a man who constantly puts himself in mortal danger, a man who refuses to stay put.
It's too much risk.
Exactly. If she gives herself to George completely and he dies in a fire or a war zone, it will utterly destroy her. It will be the ultimate abandonment.
So she chooses the safe harbor. She chooses the guy who needs nothing from her except pleasant companionship. She explicitly notes that with Nate, there was never any risk of being consumed by him. It was uncomplicated. She's using Nate as an emotional buffer, but as we all know, trying to outrun your own heart usually ends in a spectacular crash. The safe harbor eventually collapses.
Which brings us to the present day of the narrative. Frankie is 30 years old, and her curated, safe life is about to fracture. The scene opens at her rehearsal dinner, and the aesthetic described here is just dripping with false perfection.
Oh, it's so Pinterest perfect.
It's held in the elegant dining room of a historic country manor. Everything glitters. There are crystal chandeliers, fairy lights strung in the trees. The table is laid with heavy French linens, golden cutlery, votive candles casting glowing halos, and brass urns brimming with perfect peonies. It is the absolute pinnacle of curated, safe, upper-middle-class stability. It's basically an algorithm brought to life.
And Frankie is sitting there like a queen among her subjects, surrounded by her family, including her mother, who she still has a very strained, complicated relationship with, and her best friend, Aurora. But Frankie isn't eating her lavish, perfect meal.
She's distracted.
She is hiding her phone under her thigh, frantically texting George, who is supposed to be her best man, and who is currently nowhere to be found.
Her text messages reek of desperation. She's typing, "You said you'd do this. You promised to be my best man." Aurora notices her anxiety and asks if it would truly be the end of the world if George didn't show up.
And Frankie tries to brush it off.
She tries to laugh it off, but the false optimism gets stuck in her throat like a wad of overchewed gum. Because the reality is, for 22 years, George has always been there when it mattered. If he doesn't show up to her wedding, the foundation cracks.
When George finally does arrive, late and disheveled, the entire tension in the room shifts. And here we get a brilliant piece of subtle character observation from the author. George approaches the table and shakes Nate's hand. Nate is smiling, recalling tiny details from past conversations, being immensely likable and completely devoid of jealousy.
Because Nate is a good guy.
He is. But Frankie isn't looking at Nate. She is watching George. She knows him better than she knows herself. She notes that when George looks at her fiancé, his right eye gives an almost imperceptible flicker.
The eye flicker. It's the physical manifestation of George's deeply suppressed hatred for the man who is marrying the love of his life. He is playing the supportive best friend, but his body language is betraying his fury.
The mask is slipping.
Exactly. Frankie knows his smooth grin is veiling his true feelings, but she tells herself he's just being fiercely protective, that he'll learn to love Nate eventually. She is clinging to the denial so tightly because acknowledging his jealousy would require acknowledging his love.
But the universe, or rather Nate, forces the issue. The actual breakup is surprisingly abrupt and devastatingly messy. They meet at a local cafe shortly after the rehearsal dinner. Frankie comes armed with an eviscerating speech about his emotional distance, but when she actually sees Nate, her anger vanishes into shock.
He looks terrible.
Nate looks bedraggled, his face is wan, his eyes are red and puffy. Without a preamble, he returns the engagement ring.
And what's fascinating is that he doesn't even fully explain himself. He just apologizes profusely, scrapes his trembling hand over his face, and tells her that their honeymoon is already half paid for, so she should just go to Tofino anyway. He effectively says, "I can't do this," and then he says goodbye. Reality drops on Frankie like a guillotine blade. She's 30, she's profoundly burned out from her algorithmic culinary career, and her safe harbor just kicked her out into the storm.
I have to pause here and ask about Frankie's treatment of Nate. We root for Frankie and George, obviously. But wasn't Frankie incredibly unfair to Nate? I mean, she was using him to hide from her feelings for George. Is it possible Nate realized he was always going to be the third person in a two-person marriage, and he broke it off to save himself?
I think that's exactly what happened. Nate may have park ranger energy, but he isn't blind. The enmeshment between Frankie and George is impossible to ignore. Nate recognized that he was a placeholder, a shield against the volatility of George. By breaking the engagement, Nate forces Frankie to finally stop hiding.
So what does she do?
She retreats. She refuses her friend Aurora's offer to find a therapist, and instead, her parents drive her back to her childhood home in North Kawartha, the original nest. And from the back seat of her parents' car, feeling entirely broken, she sends George a single, desperate text. Please come home.
And of course, George answers the call. He rushes to Kawartha. But he doesn't just show up to pat her back, listen to her cry, and drink wine. He essentially hijacks the Tofino honeymoon. And the way he goes about it is both hilarious and deeply revealing about his psychological limitations. He arrives with an itinerary.
The intervention.
Yes.
They're sitting on the dock looking out at the lake, and George proudly announces he has a concrete plan to get her over the breakup. He says, I've got notes, I've done research, I have an itinerary. He tells her each day in Tofino has a specific theme. He approaches her broken heart the exact same way he approaches a complex investigative reporting assignment in a war zone.
I kept thinking about the parallel here. Frankie's career was derailed by trying to fit her wild, creative culinary passion into rigid, algorithm-driven TikTok recipes. Now here is George, trying to apply a strict clinical formula, a researched itinerary with daily themes, to something that is inherently wild, messy, and uncontrollable.
Human grief.
Yes, human grief and romantic love. Both of them are desperately trying to impose mechanical structure on emotional chaos. I have to wonder, is his itinerary actually a romantic gesture, or is it a slightly toxic control mechanism?
I'd call it a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
It highlights how ill-equipped they both are to handle the messy reality of their own emotions. George is highly intelligent. Frankie nuts, he coasted through high school while she had to study relentlessly just to keep up with him.
Right.
But his emotional intelligence is entirely sublimated into taking immediate action, into fixing the problem structurally so he doesn't have to sit with the painful feelings.
This dynamic is perfectly encapsulated when they actually arrive in Tofino. They walk into the Moss and Stone Resort to check in. The clerk, a guy named Kevin, looks at the reservation, which Nate originally made, and says, "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Bacon." Correct.
Oh boy.
Yeah, Frankie is instantly hot with rage that Nate presumptuously put them under his last name for the booking. But George doesn't miss a single beat. He steps in, fiercely protective, and tells Kevin, "No, my assistant must have made a mistake when he booked. We are Mrs. and Mr. Francesca Gardner."
He completely claims her identity.
He really does.
He reverses the traditional naming convention to shield her from the pain of Nate's memory. It cools her anger immediately. He knows exactly how to handle her, how to diffuse her pain.
Which sets the stage perfectly for their isolation. They are now physically isolated on Vancouver Island, surrounded by the majestic ancient mountains and the vast, unpredictable Pacific Ocean. The landscape itself is a character.
It's stunning terrain.
It is terrain, as the book notes, designed for confronting life's greatest mysteries. They are far away from the real world and the judgments of their families.
Let's talk about how this itinerary actually plays out. They engage in all these activities designed to distract Frankie. They go surfing with an instructor named Liz. Frankie struggles immensely. She falls off the board repeatedly. She cries out in frustration, but she eventually gets up and rides the wave.
Good for her.
And George is cheering her on from the water, spitting seawater like a fountain. They lounge on Chesterman Beach, drinking a local beer called Cerveza. They are slipping back into their familiar, comfortable rhythm, what Frankie describes as slipping on an old, soft Parks Canada t-shirt. It feels safe.
But the tension is building beneath that comfortable surface. The platonic wall they've relied on for 22 years is sustaining heavy structural damage with every passing day of forced proximity.
It's bound to break.
It is. And the breaking point finally happens at dinner at the Wiccan Inn. They are dressed up, the setting is incredibly romantic, the wine is flowing, and Frankie, perhaps trying to test the waters or perhaps just speaking out of fear, makes a comment that pushes George completely over the edge.
This scene is so tense.
She suggests that maybe, since traditional romance seems to fail them both, they could just have one of those companionable, sexless marriages, where we're always in each other's corner, but we also give each other freedom.
And George's reaction is explosive, at least for him. He doesn't yell. He just stares at her, unblinking, for 10 agonizing seconds. And then he pushes his heavy chair out, throws his napkin down on the table, and physically walks out of the restaurant. He leaves her sitting there alone in this romantic dining room.
Consider why that specific comment breaks him. For George, the idea of a sexless, companionable marriage is the ultimate insult to what he feels for her. He doesn't want a companionable roommate.
He wants her.
He wants all of her, mind, body, and soul. He laid his heart bare and told her he loved her during the apocalyptic fires in Yellowknife, and she ignored it and got engaged to boring Nate. Now, after he dropped everything to rescue her in Tofino, she's casually suggesting they'd just be platonic life partners.
It's just too much for him to bear.
It is. He realizes she is still trying to keep him safely categorized behind that chain-link fence from their childhood.
So he goes back to the resort and tells her he needs space, which is the absolute worst thing he could say to Frankie, because the last time he needed space, she didn't see him for 6 agonizing months. Her fear of abandonment flares up. She pushes him, demanding he explain why he's so upset.
She pushes and pushes.
And George, cornered by his own feelings and her demands, finally confesses. He says he was having a deeply suggestive dream about her, about them together, and he thinks he nudged closer to her in his sleep, and she instinctively put her arm around him. The physical proximity, the scent of her, the warmth of her, it is driving him insane.
This raw confession leads directly to the ultimate breakthrough. Frankie is dealing with her own subconscious demons. She's having horrific nightmares, waking up gasping for breath, dreaming about George trapped in a burning car in Yellowknife while walls of flame close in. She needs him to soothe her nervous system.
He's the only one who can.
Right. George comes to her bed, pulls her against his chest, and strokes her hair. She asks him to promise he won't leave her, and he promises. He hums a soft lullaby to her, calming her down.
It's such a tender, incredibly vulnerable moment that slowly, inevitably transitions into the physical culmination of their 22-year history. And I love the author's choice of setting for this. It happens during a massive, violent Pacific thunderstorm. Lightning is spearing the sky outside their window. The wind is howling against the glass.
The symbolism of the storm cannot be overstated here. Let's look back at the epigraph of the book, which sets the thematic tone before the story even begins. It's a quote from Louisa May Alcott's classic, Little Women. "I'm not afraid of storms, for I'm learning how to sail my ship."
I kept thinking about that quote as the storm raged outside their resort window. It feels like for their entire adult lives, they have been terrified of the storm of their own romantic feelings.
Oh, absolutely.
Frankie sought the calm, dull harbor of Nate to avoid the tempest of loving George. George used the literal storms of his journalism career, the wildfires, the war zones, to avoid the quiet, terrifying vulnerability of staying home and loving Frankie.
It's so true.
In Tofino, the external thunderstorm perfectly mirrors their internal state. By finally giving in to their physical and romantic desires, they are stepping out of the safe harbor once and for all. They are no longer avoiding the storm, they are actively choosing to sail right into the chaotic center of it.
Exactly. They are risking that foundational 22-year relationship for a much larger reward. And we have to acknowledge the specific psychological terror of this moment. Sleeping with your best friend is an act of profound, almost reckless bravery because the stakes are quite literally apocalyptic for your personal life.
The stakes are everything.
If you sleep with a random date and it goes badly, you lose a date. If you sleep with your best friend of 2 decades and it fractures the relationship, you don't just lose a potential lover. You lose the absolute core of your support system. You lose the only person in the entire world who knows how to comfort you after you lose a lover.
It is crossing the Rubicon. There's absolutely no going back to the way they were. They're burning the ships. During this physical culmination, George says something so specific and raw that it strips away any lingering doubts. He rasps, "Your eyes, I want to see your eyes. So beautiful. The most beautiful violet eyes I've ever seen."
The violet eyes. That is a brilliant full-circle detail. That is a genetic trait she inherited directly from her mother. By focusing on her eyes, George ties her directly back to the beginning, to the physical reality of who she is and where she comes from.
A really grounding moment.
It is. Frankie notes that as she stares up into his sea of blue eyes, the last remaining wall of their friendship comes tumbling down. It is a hurricane of their own making, and they're finally letting it wash over them.
So the romantic tension is finally resolved, but the deep dive isn't over. Because you cannot sail a ship no matter how bravely you face the storm if the hull is fundamentally rotting. The trip to Tofino concludes, but Frankie still needs profound thematic closure regarding her past, specifically the open wound left by her mother.
Right, the mother. This is where the narrative shifts from romantic resolution to personal healing. They go on a whale watching trip off the coast of Vancouver Island with a captain named Joe. They are out on the vast, choppy water and they see a puff of mist in the
Just
distance.
out on the open ocean.
Yeah, Captain Joe tells them there are 3 majestic gray whales feeding in the area. Being out there on the ocean, seeing these massive ancient creatures breach the surface, it prompts Frankie to finally directly confront the specter of her mother's lifelong obsession.
It pushes her to make a phone call she has been avoiding for years. She calls her mother from the resort. It's an incredibly revealing, painful conversation. Frankie finally asks about the specific North Atlantic right whale her mother left the family to study all those years ago in New Brunswick.
And the name of the whale is just wow.
The whale was named Francesca, which is a whole psychological unpack in itself, naming the whale after the daughter you left behind. And it was designated as whale number 1950. Frankie asks her mother, point blank, when was she last seen?
And her mother, with profound grief evident in her voice, tells her the tragic truth. Francesca died 2 years ago. It was a vessel strike, a random, brutal boating accident off the coast of Virginia. Her spine was violently dislocated, her vertebrae fractured by the ship's propeller.
It's devastating.
And to make the tragedy even deeper, the whale had a calf swimming with her near Florida that was too young to survive without its mother's milk. So both the mother whale and the baby died.
The metaphorical weight of this revelation is staggering. Frankie's mother tore their family apart for 18 months, abandoning an 8-year-old girl to study this specific animal. In Frankie's mind, for 22 years, that whale was her ultimate rival. It was the mysterious, majestic entity her mother loved more than her own flesh-and-blood daughter.
Her sister whale, basically.
Right. Learning that the whale suffered a violent, random death and that its calf died as a collateral result forces a massive perspective shift for Frankie. Frankie admits to her mother, I didn't really hate her. I'd always assumed she was still out there, my sister whale. Hearing that the whale is gone, that the rival is dead, allows Frankie to finally grieve that entire painful chapter of her life. The realization of the world's absolute fragility, that a majestic, massive creature can just be wiped out in an instant by a random boat strike, proves to Frankie that holding on to a 22-year resentment is a massive waste of energy.
It's a huge turning point.
It really is. The world is far too unpredictable, and life is far too short to maintain an endless grudge against a mother who, while deeply flawed, ultimately realized her terrible mistake and came back home. It allows Frankie to finally forgive her mother and release the anger that fueled her spiteful culinary burnout.
I see that perspective, but I'm going to push back here, and I want you, the listener, to really think about this. Is the mother's abandonment actually justified by the narrative? During this phone call, the mom confesses that her time studying the whales was actually miserable. She threw up every single time she was on a boat. She had absolutely no sea legs.
True. She really struggled out there.
Does a bout of seasickness and a failed dream excuse leaving a vulnerable 8-year-old girl behind to wonder why she wasn't enough? Or is Frankie just finally 30 years old and she's realizing that adults are messy, selfish, and deeply imperfect, and you have to choose to love them anyway if you want peace?
That is the essential question. I would argue it's the latter. Forgiveness, especially in the context of family trauma, isn't about justification. It's not about saying what you did was okay. It's about releasing the debt.
I like that, releasing the debt.
Frankie finally recognizes her mother's fundamental humanity, flaws, selfishness, and all. By releasing her mother from the pedestal of the perfect parent she should have had, Frankie frees herself to embrace her own imperfect, unpredictable future with George. She stops letting the trauma dictate her choices.
And that beautiful unscripted future is set up in the final scene of the book. Frankie and George are back from Tofino. They are at her childhood home in North Kawartha. Frankie texts George a simple request, I want to hear your story. And George replies that he needs a few days to write it down properly.
30 days later, Frankie wakes up early before the sun has fully risen over the lake. There's a brilliant red sky, red sky in morning. Sailors take warning, which is a beautiful nod to the storm they just sailed through.
That's a great detail.
She walks barefoot through the damp morning, due to the old, weathered log cabin mailbox at the end of the driveway. Inside, she finds folded sheets of paper torn from a ringed notebook.
Bringing it right back to the torn notebook paper they used for their pretend wedding vows when they were 10 years old. The symbolism is so satisfying.
The narrative circle closes perfectly. She opens the letter, and it begins like this. Once upon a time, there was a boy named George. George is very sad. First, he lost his mom, and then his dad left him behind.
It's his fairy tale. He wrote his own fairy tale, and it shows such massive, undeniable character growth for him. George is finally taking total control of his own narrative. He is no longer the passive, freezing, abandoned boy hiding in the cedar hedge, desperately waiting for Frankie to rescue him.
He's the author now.
Yes, he is writing his own story. He is claiming his own happy ending and explicitly stating in the letter that his favorite story in the entire world is the one where he falls deeply in love with his best friend.
He has stopped running to the dangerous edges of the earth to avoid being left behind. He has planted his feet firmly on the ground, looked at the person who matters most, and decided, this is where I belong. This is my home.
Let's take a breath and recap the sweeping emotional arc of this deep dive. We started with a broken, shivering 8-year-old boy in a holey sweatshirt, hiding from a world that just crushed him. We watched him grow, run from his fears, and eventually evolve into a man who finally has the courage to claim the love of his life.
Such a journey.
And we followed a burnout chef, a girl who built walls of resentment and hid behind safe, predictable algorithms to protect herself from the chaos of abandonment, as she finally found her true appetite for life again by stepping directly into the middle of a perfect storm.
It is a profound, beautiful testament to the idea that sometimes the very trauma that breaks us in childhood is the exact material we use to build our strongest shelters in adulthood. But eventually, if you want to truly live, you have to open the door of that shelter and let the weather in.
I love that. You have to let the weather in. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for today's deep dive. Society, pop culture, romantic comedies, they all constantly feed you this narrative that your romantic partner should become your best friend.
Right, the ultimate goal.
It's marketed as the ultimate relationship goal. But Our Perfect Storm flips that script entirely and asks a much harder, much more terrifying question. Consider your own life. Think about your closest platonic friendship, that one person who has been your absolute anchor during your darkest, most chaotic moments.
The person you rely on for everything.
Exactly. The person whose name might as well be tattooed on your ribs because they are so structurally vital to your survival. What would happen if you woke up one day and realized that to truly grow, to truly experience the depth of life, you had to risk destroying that anchor completely? Is the ultimate act of love protecting a friendship by keeping it safe behind a sturdy, predictable wall? Or is it having the terrifying courage to tear that wall down, sail directly into the storm, and let that friendship evolve into something entirely unrecognizable? The rain is falling, the crocus is pushing through the snow, and the gap in the hedge is waiting. The choice is yours.